Imagine finding yourself in a place that feels more like a trap than a part of your home. A basement where the walls seem to close in, where every shadow hides a secret and every sound makes your heart race. Basements have always been places of mystery, but for the people in tonight's stories, they became the setting for nightmares they'll never forget. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into 3 truly disturbing basement horror stories. From eerie noises in the dark to inexplicable encounters, these stories will make you think twice about venturing into the basement alone. So grab your blanket, turn off the lights, and get ready for a chilling ride. Let's jump into the first story. Story 1, The Locked Door, by Gabriel. My name is Gabriel, and this happened to me when I was 17 years old. My family had just moved into an old Victorian house in upstate New York. The house was beautiful, high ceilings, ornate woodwork, and a history that stretched back over a century. But it also came with its quirks, and one of them was a locked door in the basement. The basement itself was a cold, unwelcoming place. It smelled of damp earth and mildew, and the light bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long, flickering shadows. My parents assumed the locked door led to an old storage room, perhaps forgotten by the previous owners. But something about it unsettled me. It wasn't just the door itself, with its heavy iron hinges and antique lock. It was the feeling I got every time I went near it. The air around it seemed colder, heavier, as if the door was guarding something it didn't want anyone to see. At first I tried to ignore it, but the door became a fixation. I'd lie awake at night, imagining what could be behind it. Was it just a dusty old storage room? Or was it hiding something more sinister? My parents brushed off my questions, telling me I was letting my imagination run wild. One weekend, when my parents were out running errands, I decided to find out for myself. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, I went down to the basement. As I approached the door, my heart pounded in my chest. The coldness around the door seemed even more pronounced that day, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I hesitated for a moment, questioning whether this was a good idea, but curiosity won out. I wedged the crowbar into the edge of the door and gave it a few forceful pries. The old lock creaked and groaned before finally giving way with a loud snap. The sound echoed through the basement, and for a moment I thought I heard something, like a faint whisper. But I convinced myself it was just the wind. The door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. The air inside was even colder, and it carried a metallic, almost sickly sweet smell. I shone my flashlight into the room, and what I saw made my stomach churn. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with jars. At first, I thought they were filled with old preserves or pickled vegetables, but as I stepped closer, I realized the contents were far more grotesque. The jars contained what looked like preserved body parts, fingers, eyeballs, even what appeared to be a human heart, all floating in murky liquid. My flashlight beam trembled as I scanned the room. In the corner, there was an old wooden chair with leather straps attached to the arms and legs. The leather was cracked and stained, and it didn't take much imagination to figure out what it had been used for. I was frozen in place, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a faint shuffling sound coming from the darkness behind the chair. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw movement. Something was there, hiding just out of view. Panic surged through me. I slammed the door shut, bolted upstairs, and called the police. When they arrived, they found everything I described. The jars, the chair, and something I hadn't noticed. A trap door in the floor, hidden beneath a rotting rug. The trap door led to a crawl space filled with old bones and scraps of clothing. The police told us the house had once belonged to a man suspected of several disappearances in the 1940s. He had never been caught, and the house's dark history had been buried with time. We moved out of that house within a week. Even now, years later, I can't walk past a locked door without feeling a chill run down my spine. Some doors, I've learned, are better left unopened. Story 2, The Shadow in the Basement, by Melissa. My name is Melissa, and this story happened when I was 26 years old. I had just moved into my first home, a small, cozy bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I loved it. The house had a basement which I mostly used for storage. It wasn't creepy at first, just an unfinished space with concrete walls and exposed pipes. But that all changed one night. It started with small things I could easily explain away. I'd go down to grab something and notice items had been moved. A box I was sure I'd placed on one side of the room would be on the other. Sometimes I'd hear faint noises coming from the basement, like a soft creak or the sound of something brushing against the wall. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a mouse. One evening, I was watching TV in the living room when I heard a loud thud from the basement. It was so sudden and forceful that it made me jump. I paused the show and sat there for a moment, heart pounding. After a minute of silence, I convinced myself it was just something falling off a shelf. But the noise kept nagging at me, so I decided to check it out. Grabbing a flashlight, I opened the basement door and flipped on the light switch. The single bulb at the bottom of the stairs cast long, eerie shadows across the walls. I took a deep breath and descended the steps. At first, everything seemed normal. I scanned the room, but nothing appeared out of place. I was about to head back upstairs when I noticed something strange. In the far corner of the basement, where the light didn't quite reach, there was a shadow, a tall, humanoid shape. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't moving, but something about it felt wrong. The shadow didn't seem to belong to anything. There was nothing in that corner. No furniture, no boxes, nothing that could cast a shape like that. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't respond. It just stood there, unnervingly still. I took a cautious step closer, shining my flashlight into the corner. As the beam hit the shadow, it seemed to ripple, almost like smoke. And then it moved. The shadow shifted, sliding along the wall like it was alive. My heart raced as I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. It darted across the room, disappearing into another dark corner. I stood there paralyzed, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The basement suddenly felt suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. Every creak and groan of the house set me on edge. The next day, I called an electrician, thinking maybe the strange shadows were caused by faulty wiring or flickering lights. But after inspecting the basement, the electrician assured me everything was in perfect working order. Over the next few weeks, the activity escalated. I'd hear footsteps pacing back and forth in the basement when I was upstairs. The noises became so frequent that I stopped going down there altogether. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard the basement door creak open on its own. I sat up, staring at the dark hallway, too terrified to move. I eventually called a friend who was into paranormal investigations. She brought over some equipment and spent hours in the basement. When she came back upstairs, her face was pale. She showed me a recording she had taken. In it, you could hear a deep, raspy voice whisper, "Get out." I moved out of that house within a month. To this day, I have no idea what was in that basement, but I'll never forget the shadow that moved like it was alive. Some things I've learned are better left unseen. Story 3, The Basement Ritual by Adrian. My name is Adrian, and this story took place when I was 22 years old. At the time, I was renting an old house with 2 friends, Jake and Ryan. It was a fixer-upper, but it had a certain charm. Creaky wooden floors, vintage wallpaper, and a spacious basement. We planned to use the basement as a hangout spot, but we never got around to cleaning it out. It was dark, damp, and cluttered with old furniture and random junk left by the previous tenants. One evening, we were hanging out in the living room when Jake suggested we finally tackle the basement. Ryan and I reluctantly agreed. Armed with flashlights and garbage bags, we headed downstairs. The basement smelled musty, and the dim overhead light barely illuminated the space. As we started clearing out the junk, Ryan found something strange. A stack of old, yellowed papers tied together with twine. The papers were covered in handwritten symbols and diagrams that none of us could decipher. They looked ancient, almost like they belonged in a museum. "What do you think this is?" Ryan asked, holding up the papers. "Maybe it's some kind of old blueprint," Jake suggested. But I wasn't convinced. The symbols looked too intricate, too deliberate. As we dug deeper, we found more oddities: a rusted metal bowl, a collection of melted candles, and a small wooden box with a lock that had long since rusted shut. The atmosphere in the basement started to feel heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on us. "Guys, this is weird," I said, holding up the wooden box. "What kind of person keeps stuff like this?" Jake shrugged. "Probably just some hoarder. Let's just toss it all and move on." But Ryan, ever the curious one, decided to keep the papers. He said he wanted to show them to a friend who studied ancient languages. Jake and I rolled our eyes but didn't argue. That night, as I was lying in bed, I heard something strange, a faint, rhythmic thumping sound coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling, but the noise grew louder and more deliberate. It sounded like footsteps pacing back and forth. I grabbed my phone and texted Jake and Ryan to see if they were awake. Both of them replied that they were hearing the same thing. We met in the hallway, each of us armed with whatever we could find. Jake had a baseball bat, Ryan had a heavy flashlight, and I grabbed a kitchen knife. We cautiously made our way down to the basement. The air was colder than it had been earlier, and the thumping noise had stopped. The room was eerily silent, but as we shone our flashlights around, we noticed something that hadn't been there before. In the center of the floor, someone, or something, had drawn a large, intricate symbol in the dust. It matched the ones on the papers Ryan had found. Surrounding the symbol were small piles of what looked like ash. "Did one of you do this as a joke?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. "Why would we?" Ryan shot back, just as terrified. As we stood there trying to make sense of it, the overhead light began to flicker. Then it went out completely, plunging us into darkness. We scrambled to turn on our flashlights, but when the beams cut through the dark, we saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the far corner of the room was a figure. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind us. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Ryan decided to burn the papers, convinced they were somehow responsible. As the flames consumed them, we heard a low, guttural growl coming from the basement, even though the door was shut. We moved out within a week. To this day, I can't explain what we encountered in that basement, but I know one thing for sure: some mysteries are better left buried. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.